Hey, welcome to this MBA on introducing JSON and C#, or really kind of how to work with JSON using C#. I'm Christopher Harrison. That's Benjamin Lin. Benjamin, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Benjamin Lin. I'm a program manager intern here at Microsoft. I work with hardware and software. Some things I've worked on. I've made a Bluetooth PowerPoint ring controller, and I've made an automatic C# code grader. I'm a student at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and outside of work and school, I am a ballroom dancer, and I play the harmonica.
All right. As for me, I'm Christopher Harrison. I'm a senior content developer here at Microsoft, focused in on web, OSS, ASP.NET. I'm a longtime Microsoft certified trainer. I periodically blog. I periodically present at conferences. I'm a marathoner, husband, and father of one four-legged child. So, Benjamin, what are we going to be talking about in this course?
OK, so in this course, we have 4 main modules. The first is an introduction to JSON. What is JSON? Why you should use it. The next module will be an overview of the syntax and structure of JSON.
Mm-hmm.
The next one will be how to parse and generate a JSON file. And lastly, we'll be making an application which uses a JSON file as data storage.
OK. And what do we expect the viewers to have done in the past? What prerequisites do we have?
Well, we expect them to know C# at an intermediate level. We don't expect them to know any JSON because this is an introductory course to JSON. Okay. We suggest that they have Visual Studio 2015 Community installed because that is the IDE that we are working with.
OK. That sounds perfect. So, Benjamin, what's JSON? What's JSON all about?
Oh, well, what is JSON?
Yeah.
Let's start with the first module, Introduction to JSON.
Makes sense.
So JSON is a lightweight data interchange format. It stands for JavaScript Object Notation.
OK.
So you use it to basically transfer data between different formats.
OK, so I can use this to, say, write data out to a file, be able to load that back up later. And I can also use this to send information from one end to another. So, for example, maybe if I'm creating a web application using JavaScript, that I could go ahead and make a server call. I could send data over to the server using JSON and receive that back using JSON.
Exactly.
All right, perfect.
So some other reasons why you should use JSON. Well, first, it's easy for humans to read and write. Mm-hmm. It's language independent. And although it uses the same syntax as JavaScript objects, it can be used with pretty much any language.
OK.
And lastly, it can be used as a application storage file.
OK. All right, that's perfect. Now, one thing that I think is worth highlighting real quickly here is this has a lot of similarities to XML, that we can use XML as well to send information back and forth, to write out to a file. And so some people might be wondering, OK, well, why would I use this over XML? And the main reason is that with XML, unfortunately, there's a lot of bloat to the file because of the fact that you have all of the opening and the closing tags that go into it. XML can be very verbose, and an identical XML file can be much larger than a JSON file. And when we're talking about sending information over the web, especially with mobile devices, we really want to limit the amount of data that we're going to be sending back and forth, and JSON allows us to do that.
Mm-hmm. So we'll be using a couple tools in order to work with JSON. The first is the JavaScript serializer class, which is built into .NET. Mm-hmm. And the next tool is the JSON.NET third-party library, which we can acquire through a NuGet package. So let's see a sample, a demo of what JSON looks like.
Yeah, what does it look like?
So this is a JSON file. So at first glance, you can easily pick out that there are a couple things. First, there are key value pairs, name, address, courses. There are curly braces, which represent objects, and we'll get into that later. And there are also square brackets, which indicate arrays, which we'll also get into later. Now, even if you have no idea what JSON is, no knowledge of it, you can still kind of pick out information from this format because it is easy to read. So in my Visual Studio project, you can tell that there's the name of this data is School of Fine Art. There's an address. It has a list of courses. And within each course, there's a subject, a teacher, and a list of students. So very easy to read, very easy to work with, and we'll show you how to work with that in the later modules.
OK, perfect. So then I think that's basically what we wanted to cover here, just a little bit of an intro, talk a little bit about why we want to use JSON. We took a look at a file, and there's a very good chance that if you're watching this, you might still be looking at that file and going, well, I don't necessarily completely get that yet. Don't worry, that's exactly what the next module is here for, to actually dig deeper into that JSON file. So let's go ahead, put a wrap on this, and then we'll see you in the next module where we'll dig deeper into that JSON file. Welcome back to Introduction to JSON with C#. I'm Christopher Harrison. That's Benjamin Lin. In the prior module, we introduced the concept of JSON, talked a little bit about what it is, opened up a huge JSON file, and kind of poked at it. But now I think is a good time to actually start digging in and talking about exactly what makes up a JSON file and what the structure actually consists of.
OK, so in this module, we're going to talk about what exactly makes up a JSON file. Now we're going to cover values, objects, arrays, and then we're going to put those all together because those are all the things that make up a JSON file. So let's start with JSON values. A JSON value can be a string, a number, a Boolean, a null, or a more complex value being an object or an array.
OK, and we'll talk about objects and arrays a little bit later.
Yeah,
Okay.
So I'm going to give a demo on what is those basic types that I mentioned before.
OK, let's see it.
So back to that messy school data JSON file. We have a string. We can tell that's a string because it's surrounded by quotation marks.
OK, so just like any programming language. Yep.
We have a number. And you can see there's no quotation marks. So if there were quotation marks, it would still be a string, but there's not.
OK.
We have a Boolean. And those more complex values, objects, and arrays, we'll talk about them later. But just know for now that an object is indicated by a curly brace, and an array is indicated by a bracket.
OK, perfect.
So let's talk about JSON objects. So a JSON object is a collection of name-value pairs that are separated by colons.
OK. Just like we see there. Yep.
So it's encapsulated by curly braces, and each of the pairs is separated by commas.
OK.
So let's go through a quick demo of what a JSON object looks like. So here's a very simple example. As I mentioned before, here are the curly braces that indicate a JSON object. We have name-value pairs. The colon represents a name-value pair, and each pair is separated by a comma.
I like that little thing that Visual Studio does there of having the key or the name in blue and then the value in red. It kind of nice little separation there. I like it. OK.
So here's a slightly more complex example. Again, we have the curly braces representing an object. This time we have three name-value pairs, the first being type, second being wheel, and third being color. Type is just a string. Wheels is a number. And colors, it's an array, as shown by the brackets. And we'll get into those later.
OK.
And lastly, here's a even more complicated example. Still, it's an object, as shown by the curly braces. It has three name-value pairs. The first is a string. The second, oh, what's this? Curly braces.
Oh, wait, that's an object.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so I guess the value for the second name-value pair is an object that has its own name-value pairs.
So an object can have an object. So I can create a hierarchy just like I would to represent more complex. So if I had, let's say, for example, just like you have here, you've got the store, and the store has an owner. That owner could be an object. I can do that inside of JSON.
And that's the amazing part of JSON. And the last one, we have an array. And let's actually get into arrays right now.
I think that's perfect. Kind of a nice little segue there.
So JSON arrays. So JSON arrays, what are they? JSON arrays are values that are enclosed by brackets, and each value is separated by a comma.
OK.
It's a bit easier than objects because it's just a list of things. So let's go see some examples of JSON arrays.
Examples of lists of things.
So I'm opening up my Visual Studio file, and I am going to see my first array example. And as indicated by the brackets, we have a JSON array. And in this example, it's an array of 4 strings. And each string is separated by commas, and we know it's a string because of the quotation marks. Now here's a slightly different example, still pretty basic. It's an array of numbers. And here is an array showing the days of the week. And here's a slightly more complex array. We can tell it's an array by the brackets at the top. And what's within this array? Oh, curly braces. It must be an object.
OK, so my array can be a collection of anything, including objects.
Correct.
OK.
And these objects all have 3 name-value pairs, as we learned in the prior teaching of objects. And the values for these name-value pairs are strings, booleans, and numbers.
Yep. OK. So my name is Apple in stock, and then the price or the number that was there. Yeah. OK. Nice. So how about, bring it all together? So how about kind of a more real-world example there, that huge list of classes? Let's kind of go back in and break that down.
OK, so the key concepts to get from this module is that a JSON value can be anything. It can be an object, it can be an array, or it can be a simple type as a string or a number. And furthermore, JSON objects and arrays can contain other JSON objects and arrays. So that is how a JSON file expands to encapsulate all the data that your application needs. So let's go back to that giant, messy JSON data file we had in the beginning.
Hopefully make it a little less messy now.
So at the top, we have an object because there are curly braces. And let's see what's inside this object. We have 3 name-value pairs, a name, an address, and a list of courses. So the first 2 just being strings, and the third being an array, as indicated by the square bracket. So what is this an array of? We can see here there's a curly brace, so that means that there are objects within this array. And within this object, we have a few name-value pairs, a subject, a teacher, and a student. Subject is just a string. Teacher is another object. This object having a name, an age, and is present. And student is an array of objects again because of the curly braces. And each object has a name, an age, and is present.
So my array could contain an object, and that object that it contains could actually have another array. So I really can model whatever my data structure happens to be. That JSON is just that flexible.
Correct. So if we look back to this file, all it's representing is a school with a name, an address, and a list of courses. Within each course, there is a subject, a teacher, and a list of students.
OK, that's perfect. I like it.
And it's easy to read and easy to use.
I like it. OK, cool. So that's how a JSON file is structured. That's how the JSON file looks. I guess the next step is to actually start creating JSON files.
Correct.
All right. And we'll do that in the next module.
Yeah.
All right. Sounds perfect. We'll see you guys in the next module. Hey, welcome back to Introduction to JSON with C#. I'm Christopher Harrison. That's Benjamin Lin. In the prior module, we examined the structure of a JSON file, took a look at all the different moving parts that make up a JSON file, but we were left with the question, how do we actually read a JSON file, and how do we actually create a JSON file? So, Benjamin, how do we do that?
OK, well, right now in Module 3, we'll show you how to do that.
Perfect. I like it.
we're going to teach you how to parse a JSON file, how to generate a JSON file, and so let's start with parsing a JSON file.
OK.
So I'm going to first talk about some tools we use to do this. So one of the tools is the JavaScript serializer class. It's built into .NET, and it's used to parse or generate a JSON file. The next tool is the JSON.NET library. Now, this is a third-party NuGet package you can easily add onto any Visual Studio application. And I'm going to show you a demo how to use both of them. So here in my Visual Studio application, first off, I'm going to show you how to add the necessary steps you need to take in order to add the JavaScript serializer class into your project.
And the JavaScript serializer is part of the .NET framework.
Correct, but you still need to add a reference.
OK.
So you click References, click Add Reference, and scroll down. And the specific one you're looking for is the system.web.extensions. So you click that, you add it. After that, you need to add using system.web.script.serialization. Otherwise, your JavaScript serializer class won't work. And also, we're using some file I/O, so we need to include the system.io library as well. So in my file, I have a simple person class. There are no attributes, just a name, an age, and a toString override so that we can display our data on the console to verify if we parsed our JSON file correctly.
So there's nothing that's special about that class. It's just a POCO, just a normal class.
Correct.
OK.
So in the actual code, what am I doing? So first, I am reading all of the text from my JSON file, which is included in my /bin/debug folder. I'm putting that into a string called JSON string. Next, I'm making an instance of the JavaScript serializer class. I am calling one of its functions, the deserialize function, and specifying the type as person.
And so you're specifying that type as a generic, and that's how it knows to return back a person.
Correct.
OK.
And then I'm going to write it to the console. So
what does that JSON file look like before you run that?
Oh, so JSON file, it's a very simple one. We have an object, name, age.
OK. So Bob and 52. So that's what we should see on the screen.
Hopefully, Bob didn't age. So, we run it, and Bob 52. So
perfect.
OK. So that is how to use the JavaScript serializer class. Now, the JSON.NET library is very similar. In order to add the JSON.NET, we use manage NuGet packages. We type JSON, and JSON.NET is the first one that pops up. Add this one. After
Which
that,
you've already done.
I've already done that. So, so be sure to include using newtonsoft.json and system.io because we are dealing with file I/O. So in my file, I have another person, same as before, nothing special. And I'm going to walk you through the code. So first, I read all of the text within the JSON file, which is in the bin/debug folder, into the JSON string. And let's see it. Bob, this time he's 5 years old.
So a long time ago.
Long time ago. And we use the JSON convert.deserialize object function. We specify the type as person because it's also generic. And we feed that into P1, which is a person.
So it seems like the major difference here is that here it's just that deserialize object is just available as a static method right off of the class, like a helper method. But with the JSON serializer, we actually had to new up that object. We had to create an instance of it in order to use that. That seems like the major difference here. OK.
So let's run it and see if it actually works. So Bob, age 5.
Perfect.
So that was parsing JSON files. So how do we generate a JSON file?
Right. So if I have an object, how do I write that out to JSON?
Oh, well, I will, using the same tools, the JavaScript serializer class and the JSON.NET library, you can do the same thing. So I'm going to walk through a demo of those two.
OK.
In my Visual Studio application, I'm going to uncomment these lines that basically they output a JSON file. So first, I'm making a new person Name Ben, age 58.
You look very good for 58, I must say.
Thank you. I take care of myself. So I'm loading that into P2. I'm going to serialize that by using the .serialize function.
And that's going to give you back the string, the JSON string.
Correct. Okay. And that goes into output JSON. And next, I am doing some file I/O. I'm writing that out to output.json. So let's run it.
OK, so it's reading back in just because you still had that code from before, but it generated now that output JSON file, which should have Ben and 58 in it. So
correct.
Let's go see that.
So I'm going to go File, Open, File. It's in the bin/debug folder, output.json. Let's look in it. Ben, age 58.
OK.
So we verified that the JavaScript serializer class can do both generating and parsing of JSON files.
So deserialize to load it in, and then serialize if we want to write it out.
Correct.
OK.
And the JSON.NET library is very similar. So let's uncomment the lines of code that generate our output JSON file. Mm-hmm. Ben, age 46. My age keeps changing.
Wow.
So
you gained 12 years there. It's pretty well done.
Mm-hmm. So I'm making a new person, P2. I'm using JSON convert.serialize object to put that into a string, and then I'm writing that string to a file.
OK.
So let's run this.
And again, we see the prior read from before because that code was still there.
But there now should be a new file in the bin/debug folder. So let's verify if it's there. Ben,
yep.
46.
Perfect. All right. So that really is all there is to it, to be able to read our objects in and to write the objects out. Read them in, it's deserialize. Write them out, it's serialize. And it really just needs to be in that JSON format. Perfect. All right. Well, with that, let's go ahead and wrap this module up, and then we'll come on back and take a look at a little bit more of an advanced example in the last module.
Yeah.
OK. All right. That sounds good. We'll see you guys in the next module. Welcome back. Last module, Introduction to JSON using C#. I'm still Christopher Harrison. That's still Benjamin Lin. Now, we've seen an awful lot when it comes to JSON. We've seen the structure of the file. We've seen how to read, how to write. Now we want to put it all together into an example application where we could actually write all this out to a file and kind of start seeing maybe a little bit of how we could potentially use this in the real world.
OK, so this is module 4, and I'll be covering how to use a JSON file as an application storage device. So we're going to be building an application that reads data from a JSON file on start. The data is going to be edited through console input, and when you exit, the JSON data file will be rewritten.
And so one thing that's worth highlighting real quickly here is that you did a console app just to do a console app, just so that way all the code was right there. But this could be a web application. This could be a Windows app. You're just doing this as a console just to be able to more easily show the code.
Correct.
OK.
So let's get to the demo. So I am opening up my Visual Studio project, and I'm going to show a quick demo before I get into the details of the application. So here we have the console application. Several commands at your whim. So I'm going to show the contents of what's in the application. So what this application is, it's a shopping list, and you can add items to the shopping list, delete them as you choose. And so there's nothing in this list right now because we didn't do anything. And if we look at the JSON data file that we started with, there's nothing in that as well.
That looks pretty empty to me.
That is correct. So we can add some things to the item. So let's add some ham, some $50. Add some cheese, $20, and let's show the contents. So now we have some ham and some cheese. And so let's quit the program. We're done shopping.
Getting hungry now.
And it says the data.json file has been rewritten. And let's, oh, something happened. Oh, it's been rewritten.
Oh, cool. OK.
So then let's if we restart this program and we show the contents. Hey, look, it's still there. So
it read all that in from the file.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? So you can store your application data on a JSON file.
Nice. OK.
So let's edit this. So let's delete the ham, And ham is deleted, so let's quit this. And we should expect the ham to be gone from the JSON file, correct?
Correct.
So let's look at the JSON file. It's been edited. And then you look at it.
Yep.
There's only cheese.
Perfect. I like it.
So let's go through the details of this application.
OK.
So I'm using JSON.NET. I've included it as a NuGet package already. And since this is the shopping list and I have items to add to the shopping list, I've created a class called item. And it's very, very simple class. It just has a string for a name, price as an int, basic constructor, and it's an I-equatable because since we're dealing with lists and we want to be able to easily add and delete items off the list,
yep.
If we make it an I-equatable, it's easy to delete things.
Right.
And this equals function says that 2 of these class items are equal if they have the same name.
OK.
So in my actual main function, so as we saw in earlier modules, I am reading from my data.json file, and I'm storing that into a string. I am deserializing that string into a list. So earlier we deserialized a person, and now we're specifying the type as a list of items, and we're deserializing it into an item list called myList.
Oh, so the deserialize could actually deserialize to anything. So it doesn't have to just be an individual object. It could actually be a list.
Correct.
OK, cool.
And here we have to check if the file is empty. And if the file is empty, we need to create a new list because the list does not exist yet.
Right.
And we can't add items to a non-existing list. So, and for this section of the code, it's just a switch statement that takes keyboard input and does something to it. So if we press A, it's going to do a read line for the name of the item. Then it's going to ask for its price, and then it's going to simply add that, create a new item and add that to the list.
So just adding it to the list, just like a normal list. So there's nothing that's particular to JSON.
Yeah, nothing JSON. It's just adding to a list.
OK.
And delete, similar. We're specifying the name of it. We're removing it from the list. And Q for quitting the program. And S just for showing the contents of the list.
OK.
So when you press Q and you quit from the program, that is when it exits from the while loop and actually rewrites the JSON data file. And it does that just as before. We serialize our object. In this case, it's our list. Serialize that into a string and write that string to a JSON file.
Perfect.
So
well, let's see it one more time.
Yeah. So let's add some more. Let's add a car, and let's add a house.
It's an expensive house.
Yeah, let's store the contents right here. And let's quit because we're done shopping. We spent all our money on a house. So
yes.
It's rewritten the JSON file. So let's exit. Yes to all. We have cheese, car, house, and
all inside that JSON file.
Yeah, so
OK.
pretty much all it is to that application.
Cool. I like it. So what we wound up seeing through the course of the course is we introduced JSON, talked a little bit about what JSON is. We then dug a little deeper into the actual structure, the format of a JSON file, what makes all of that work. We then took a look at how we can both read and write JSON strings from an object, so how to both deserialize and serialize, and then close it off with an example of how you could actually use JSON to store some application data and use that as a backing store for an app that you've created. All right, beautiful. I love it. Well, Benjamin, thank you again for coming out and doing this. And I guess that puts a wrap on the course. So thanks a lot for tuning in.
Thank you.